Subscribe to Story Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. The linoleum floor of Miller's diner reflected the afternoon sun in uneven patches. Grady Howell sat across from Lessa Sullivan, watching her daughter Alexandria pick at her pancakes with the mechanical precision of someone going through motions rather than enjoying a meal. The 12-year-old had barely spoken since they'd arrived, her eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the window. "Alex, honey, you haven't touched your food," Lessa said, her voice carrying the particular tone mothers develop when worry masquerades as casual observation. Alexandria's fork scraped against the plate. "Not hungry." Grady exchanged a glance with Lessa. They'd been together 8 months now, long enough for him to recognize the concern etched in the slight furrow of her brow, the way her fingers drummed against her coffee cup. Long enough to care deeply about this quiet girl who'd initially regarded him with the suspicious wariness of someone who'd seen her mother's relationships fail before. "School rough today?" Grady asked, keeping his tone light. A shrug. The universal language of adolescent avoidance. Lessa sighed. "Her report card came yesterday. We need to talk about it, Alex." The fork clattered against the plate. "Can we not do this here? We tried talking about it at home. You locked yourself in your room." Grady had been there for that conversation, or rather, the attempt at one. He'd heard Lessa's pleading voice through the bedroom door, the silence that answered back like a wall. Something had shifted in Alexandria over the past 3 months. The bright-eyed girl who'd once enthusiastically explained her science projects had retreated into herself, grades plummeting from honor roll to barely passing. "I'm trying," Alexandria whispered, and Grady caught the tremor in her voice. Lessa reached across the table, covering her daughter's hand with her own. "I know, sweetheart. That's why we got you Mr. Bradford, remember? To help you catch up." Gonzalo Bradford. The name hung in the air like smoke. Lessa had been thrilled to find him a tutor with impeccable credentials, references from half a dozen families in their suburb of Cleveland, a patient demeanor that seemed perfect for Alexandria's learning style. He'd been working with her for 2 months now, 3 times a week in their dining room, while Lessa worked her nursing shifts at Metro Hospital and Grady handled his construction projects. "He's helping," Alexandria said quickly. Too quickly. Her hand pulled away from her mother's, disappearing under the table. "Your grades are getting worse, not better," Lessa said gently. "Your math teacher says you're distracted in class. Your English essay last week was half the required length. Baby, this isn't like you." Grady studied Alexandria's face, the way her jaw clenched, the slight pallor of her complexion. His years in construction management had taught him to read people, to spot the hairline fractures before the whole structure collapsed. Something was fundamentally wrong here, and it went deeper than academic struggles. "Maybe she needs a different approach," Lessa continued, glancing at Grady as if seeking confirmation. "Mr. Bradford comes so highly recommended, but everyone learns differently. Maybe we should try." "No." Alexandria's voice cracked. "I mean, he's fine. I just need to work harder." The conversation dissolved into uncomfortable silence, punctuated by the clatter of dishes and the murmur of other diners. Grady watched Alexandria's reflection in the window, saw the way her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Whatever was happening, the girl was terrified. That evening, Grady stood in his garage apartment above the 2-car structure behind Lessa's house, staring at the financial statements spread across his desk. His construction company, Howell and Associates, had landed 3 major contracts this year, enough to finally move past the lean years after his divorce. Enough to consider proposing to Lessa, making this relationship permanent. But the numbers blurred as his mind returned to Alexandria's face across that diner table. Fear. That's what he'd seen. Not embarrassment about grades or typical teenage angst. Genuine, bone-deep fear. His phone buzzed. Lessa's name lit the screen. She locked herself in the bathroom, Lessa said without preamble, her voice strained. "She's been in there for an hour." "Grady, I don't know what to do. I'll be right there." The main house was a modest colonial that Lessa had bought after her divorce 5 years ago. Grady had replaced the roof last spring, repainted the exterior in warm gray tones that made the white shutters pop. He'd been slowly becoming part of the structure of their lives, fitting himself into the framework without forcing it. Lessa met him at the door, mascara smudged, still in her scrubs from the hospital. "She won't talk to me. She just keeps saying everything's fine, but I can hear her crying." Grady climbed the stairs to the second floor, stood outside the bathroom door. Alex? It's Grady. Can I come in? Silence. Then the sound of running water. A minute later, the lock clicked. Alexandria appeared in the doorway, face scrubbed clean, eyes red-rimmed. I'm fine, she said automatically. You're not, Grady replied, keeping his voice level. And that's okay. But we need to figure out what's going on, so we can help. You can't help. The words emerged barely above a whisper. Try me. Something flickered across her face calculation. Maybe, or the desperate hope of someone drowning who spots a possible lifeline. But then her expression shuttered closed again. I just need to focus more on my homework. Mr. Bradford says, I'm not applying myself. There it was again, Bradford's name, and that same flash of something in Alexandria's eyes. Not respect, not even frustration. Something closer to terror masked as compliance. When's your next session with him? Grady asked. Tomorrow, 4 o'clock. Mind if I sit in? I used to be pretty good at math. Maybe I can pick up some study techniques to help you between sessions. Panic bloomed across Alexandria's features. No, I mean, that's not necessary. He's really good. I just need to. I need to go to bed. She darted past him into her room, door closing with finality. Grady stood in the hallway, every instinct screaming that something was catastrophically wrong. He'd built structures for 20 years, understood load-bearing walls and weak foundations. This household was cracking, and he needed to find the source before it collapsed entirely. The next afternoon, Grady's project supervisor called with a crisis at the Lakewood site, a concrete pour scheduled for the following morning, but the rebar inspection had failed. It would take hours to resolve, maybe all night. He called Lessa to explain, heard the disappointment in her voice. I was hoping you'd be here when Mr. Bradford comes, she said. I have to cover an extra shift. Janine called in sick and we're already short-staffed. What time do you leave? 3:30. He gets here at 4, so Alex won't be alone long. She has her phone if she needs anything. Grady's grip tightened on his cell. Lessa, maybe we should reschedule Bradford. I don't like the idea of Alex being alone with him. Grady, he's a professional tutor. He's been working with children for 15 years. You're being paranoid. Was he? He couldn't articulate the source of his unease, had no concrete evidence beyond a gut feeling and a 12-year-old's frightened eyes. Just, can you ask a neighbor to check in? Mrs. Chen next door, maybe? Mrs. Chen is in Florida visiting her son. Grady, Alex will be fine for 15 minutes until he arrives. She's 12, not 6. After the call ended, Grady sat in his truck outside the Lakewood site, staring at nothing. His foreman, Quincy Casey, tapped on the window. Boss, inspector's here. We need your signature on the revision forms. Yeah, coming. But as he climbed out of the truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a terrible mistake, that he should be at Lessa's house instead of here. He pulled out his phone, almost called Lessa back, then stopped himself. He was being irrational. Bradford was a vetted professional. Alexandria would be fine. The inspection took 3 hours. By the time Grady signed off on the corrected plans and coordinated the morning pour schedule, twilight had settled over Cleveland like a bruise. His phone showed 2 missed calls from Lessa, one from a number he didn't recognize. He called Lessa first. Where have you been? Her voice was sharp with stress. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. Dead zone at the site. What's wrong? Alexandria's homework. I asked her to leave it out so I could check it before bed. And Grady, there's something you need to see. Can you come over? 20 minutes later, he stood in Lessa's dining room, looking at Alexandria's math worksheet. The problems were standard 8th grade algebra, but it wasn't the equations that made his blood run cold. It was the notation in the margins, written in a different hand than Alexandria's careful script. Good girl. This makes me happy. You're learning. Keep being good for me. Remember, this is our special secret. Don't disappoint me. Grady's hands began to shake. He flipped through more pages, more notes, increasingly personal, increasingly wrong. A history essay marked up not with corrections, but with compliments that made his skin crawl. You're so mature for your age. Special. Our connection is unique. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Lessa stood across the table, arms wrapped around herself. I didn't see it before. I should have looked closer, but I trusted. I thought he was just being encouraging. Where's Alex? In bed. She saw me reading these and broke down. Grady, she's been terrified. He told her that if she said anything, we'd be angry at her, that we'd think she was making it up for attention. He said tutors touch students all the time to correct their posture, their pencil grip, that it was normal. The room tilted. Grady gripped the edge of the table, forcing himself to breathe through the rage that threatened to overwhelm rational thought. Did he? She says no. But Grady, the way she talks about it, inappropriate touching, comments about her body, questions about her personal life that had nothing to do with schoolwork. And the notes. God. The notes. Grady pulled out his phone with hands that still trembled. I'm calling the police. I already did. They're sending someone over, but they said. Les's voice broke. They said it might be hard to prove anything criminal. The notes are inappropriate but not explicitly illegal. The touching she described might be interpreted as accidental. Without more concrete evidence, they said it's unlikely to result in charges beyond maybe a cease and desist order. Are you fucking kidding me? That's what they said. They're still coming to take a statement, and they'll investigate, but the detective I spoke to was realistic about outcomes. He said he sees cases like this all the time, predators who know exactly how to stay just shy of prosecutable. Grady looked down at the homework again, at Bradford's handwriting violating the margins of his girlfriend's daughter's schoolwork. Good girl. His vision tunneled, the edges going red. Grady. Les's voice seemed distant. What are you thinking? He looked up at her, saw the fear and fury mirrored in her expression. Where does Bradford live? Don't. Whatever you're thinking, don't. We'll let the police handle this. The police won't do shit. You said it yourself, he knows how to avoid leaving prosecutable evidence. He's been doing this for 15 years, Lessa. 15 years of impeccable references and perfect credentials. How many other girls do you think there've been? How many other families where the grades dropped and the parents just switched tutors, never knowing why their daughters became withdrawn and afraid? Grady, please. Lessa moved around the table, placed her hands on his arms. I know you're angry. I'm angry too. I'm fucking furious. But if you do something stupid, you'll end up in jail and he'll still be out there. Not if I'm smart about it. Listen to yourself. This isn't you. You're not. What? Not capable of protecting the people I love? Not willing to do what needs to be done when the system fails. He pulled away from her grip, began pacing. I spent 3 years in the Marines, Lessa. I know exactly what I'm capable of. She'd known about his military service infantry, 2 tours in Afghanistan, an honorable discharge that he never discussed in detail. But she'd never seen this version of him. The one whose voice had gone quiet and cold, whose movements had shifted from the casual ease of a craftsman to the controlled precision of someone trained for violence. I'm calling my lawyer, Lessa said quietly. And we're waiting for the police. Promise me you won't do anything tonight. Grady looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Tonight? I promise I won't do anything tonight. But even as he said it, his mind was already working through scenarios, calculating approaches, weighing options with the methodical focus he usually reserved for complex construction projects. Bradford had built himself a perfect shield of plausible deniability, a fortress of reputation and carefully groomed appearances. Grady was very good at demolition. Detective Quincy Casey, no relation to Grady's foreman, just one of life's small ironies, arrived at 9 p.m. He was a tired-looking man in his 50s, with the resigned air of someone who'd seen too much human ugliness to be shocked by new variations. He took Alexandria's statement gently, asked Lessa questions about Bradford's background, examined the homework with professional interest that didn't translate to optimism. I'll bring him in for questioning, Casey said, closing his notebook, and we'll open an investigation. But Miss Sullivan, Mr. Howell, I need to be straight with you. Unless we find explicit images, messages of a sexual nature, or the girl is willing to testify that he touched her in clearly inappropriate ways, the DA probably won't file charges. What about the notes? Grady demanded. That's grooming behavior. That's predatory. It's concerning, absolutely. But a defense attorney will argue it's overly familiar, maybe inappropriate, but not criminal. Especially since there are no explicitly sexual statements. Casey's expression was sympathetic but firm. I've been working sex crimes for 12 years. I know how these guys operate. They're careful. They push boundaries incrementally, always leaving themselves an out. So he gets away with it. I didn't say that. We'll investigate thoroughly. We'll interview his other clients. Look for patterns. But Mr. Howell, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this doesn't end with handcuffs and prison time. After Casey left, Grady sat with Lessa and Alexandria in the living room. The girl was curled against her mother, exhausted from crying. She looked younger than 12, fragile in a way that made Grady's chest ache. "I'm sorry," Alexandria whispered. "I should have told you sooner." "No, baby," Lessa said fiercely. "This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. He said you'd be disappointed in me. That I should have been smarter. Should have known better." Grady knelt in front of them, making sure Alexandria could see his face. "Alex, look at me. You did nothing wrong. You're a kid. He's an adult who deliberately manipulated you. The blame sits entirely with him. Do you understand?" She nodded, but doubt still clouded her eyes. Bradford had done more than violate her boundaries. He twisted her perception of reality, made her complicit in her own victimization through shame and self-blame. Classic predator tactics, refined over years of practice. After putting Alexandria to bed, Grady and Lessa sat on the back porch, not speaking, both lost in their own dark thoughts. Finally, Lessa broke the silence. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet." "That's not true. I can see it in your face. You're planning something." Grady looked at her directly. "If I tell you, you become an accessory. Better if you don't know." Grady. He hurt her. Lessa. He hurt a 12-year-old girl. And he's done it before. And he'll do it again because the system won't stop him. Someone has to. Not like this. Not by throwing your life away. Who says I'll get caught? Lessa stood abruptly, pacing the porch. "You're not a vigilante. You're a good man who runs a successful business, who has a future, who I was starting to think I might actually build a life with. Don't throw that away. And if it was your daughter who he'd gone further with, if we found out a year from now instead of now, would you still want me to stand back and let the legal system fail her?" The question hung between them like a blade. Lessa's silence was answer enough. "I'm not going to kill him," Grady said quietly. "But I'm going to make sure he never hurts another child. That's not negotiable." He stood, kissed Lessa's forehead, and walked back to his apartment above the garage. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight, but that was fine. He had planning to do. Gonzalo Bradford lived in a well-maintained ranch house in Parma Heights, a comfortable middle-class neighborhood of neat lawns and basketball hoops. Grady drove past it the next morning, cataloging details. Security system sign in the front yard. Probably fake, given the lack of cameras visible from the street. Detached garage, open currently, showing a silver Honda Accord. Newspapers piled on the front porch, suggesting Bradford hadn't checked his mail yet today. Probably still rattled from Detective Casey's visit last night. Good. Rattled people made mistakes. Grady continued to his construction site, where Quincy, his foreman, not the detective, was waiting with the morning crew. Concrete pour went smooth. Quincy reported. Inspectors signed off. "We're ahead of schedule." "Good. I need you to take lead for the next few days." Something personal came up. Quincy, who'd worked with Grady for 8 years, simply nodded. "Anything I can help with?" "Not unless you know a good PI. Private investigator?" "Actually, yeah. My brother-in-law, Cesar Gallagher. Does mostly insurance fraud, but he's thorough. Want his number?" 2 hours later, Grady sat across from Cesar Gallagher in a downtown coffee shop. Cesar was younger than expected, maybe early 30s, with the alert eyes of someone trained to notice details. "Quincy says you need background on someone," Cesar said, stirring sugar into his espresso. "Gonzalo Bradford. Tutor. Lives in Parma Heights. I need to know everything. Client list, financial records, online activity, where he goes, who he sees. Everything. This about the thing with your girlfriend's kid?" Quincy mentioned some trouble. "It is. Police involved? They're investigating, but it won't go anywhere." Cesar leaned back, studying Grady's face. "I need to know what you're planning to do with this information. I don't facilitate illegal activity." "I'm going to destroy his life," Grady said calmly. "But I'm going to do it legally. Well, mostly legally. I need ammunition, Cesar. The system won't protect kids from guys like this, so I'm going to make sure he can't practice anymore. You could just beat the shit out of him. Lots simpler. That gives him victim status. I want him exposed, not martyred. Cesar considered this, then nodded. I'll need a retainer. 2,000 to start. Grady pulled out his checkbook. How fast can you work? For something like this? I'll have preliminary info in 48 hours. Deep dive within a week. While Cesar began his investigation, Grady focused on his own research. Bradford's professional website listed impressive credentials, master's degree in education from Ohio State. 15 years of experience, testimonials from satisfied parents. But Grady noticed something interesting. No long-term clients. Every testimonial was from parents whose children had worked with Bradford for less than 6 months. He started making calls, tracking down former clients through parent networks and school directories. The pattern emerged quickly. Most families spoke highly of Bradford initially, but several mentioned their daughters had eventually become uncomfortable and they'd switched tutors. When Grady pressed gently, stories emerged of boundary violations, nothing explicitly illegal, but enough to make parents uneasy. A hand on a shoulder that lingered too long. Comments about physical development, questions about boyfriends and personal matters. Each family had made the same calculation. Easier to quietly change tutors than make formal accusations with little proof. Bradford had been playing this game for years, cycling through victims, never staying long enough to trigger serious investigation. Until now. On the third day, Grady received a call from Detective Casey. Thought you'd want to know we brought Bradford in for questioning. He lawyered up immediately, didn't answer anything substantive. His attorney's already making noise about harassment. So that's it? We're still investigating, but between you and me? Unless another victim comes forward with more explicit abuse, we don't have enough. The DA won't touch it. After hanging up, Grady stood in his apartment, staring at the wall where he'd begun assembling information. Photos of Bradford's house, printouts of his website, notes from parent interviews. A tactical map, though the strategy remained incomplete. His phone buzzed. Cesar. Got something interesting. The PI said. Bradford's finances show regular payments to a P.O. box in Akron. Monthly, like clockwork for the past 3 years. $2,000 each time. Blackmail. Or child support he's hiding. Or gambling debts. Hard to say without more digging. But there's more his internet activity. Guys, careful. Uses VPNs and encrypted browsers. But I've got a contact who could get past that. It'd be expensive and, let's say, it exists in a legal gray area. Do it. Grady, if we find what I think we might find, you need to take it straight to the police. Don't try to handle it yourself. Just get me the information. 3 days later, Cesar called again, his voice tight. You need to come to my office. Now. And you're going to want to bring Detective Casey. Cesar's office was a cramped space above a Vietnamese restaurant in Cleveland's Asia Plaza. Grady climbed the stairs with a sense of dread mixed with anticipation. Whatever Cesar had found, it was significant. The PI looked like he hadn't slept. His desk was covered with printouts. His laptop open to encrypted folders. I'm going to show you something, and then we're going to call the police immediately. I mean it, Grady. What I found goes beyond your personal situation. This is federal-level shit. He turned the laptop screen. Grady looked, and the world tilted. Chat logs. Hundreds of them. Bradford communicating with other men, trading techniques for grooming children, sharing stories of successful manipulations, and photos nothing explicitly illegal that Cesar had found so far, but enough to show a network, a community of predators sharing information. The payments to Akron, Cesar said quietly. They're going to a server host. He's running a private forum. Encrypted, invitation only. My contact barely scratched the surface before pulling out. He said the content got too dark too fast. Grady's hands clenched into fists. How many people in this network? At least 30 active users based on the chat logs. Could be more. Grady, this is bigger than Bradford. This is an organized group. And Alexandria was just. What? Practice? A trophy to share with his sick friends? I don't know. But the police need this now. This is the kind of evidence that gets real investigations started. The kind that brings down multiple people. Grady pulled out his phone, called Detective Casey. I have something you need to see, and you're going to want to bring federal backup. 2 hours later, Casey sat in Cesar's office with 2 FBI agents, going through the evidence with the focused intensity of bloodhounds catching a scent. The younger agent, who introduced herself as Special Agent Aisha Boyle, looked at Grady with a mixture of respect and suspicion. "How exactly did you obtain this information, Mr. Howell?" "I hired a private investigator to look into Bradford's background after he groomed my girlfriend's daughter. Mr. Gallagher discovered the financial irregularities and pursued them through methods that might make this evidence inadmissible." Cesar spoke up. "I have a contact who found the server information through open-source intelligence. Everything I found was obtained legally, even if the methods were creative." Boyle didn't look convinced, but her partner, Agent Orval Zhang, was more pragmatic. "We can parallel construct from here. Use this as a roadmap and build our own case. The server host in Akron, we can get warrants for that. Bradford's devices, his home, his client records. This is enough for probable cause." "How long?" Grady asked. "To build a prosecutable case? Months, minimum. Maybe years. These things move slowly. And Bradford is free until then? Unless we can find concrete evidence of a crime against a specific victim, yes. But Mr. Howell, I understand your frustration, but you need to let us handle this now. These are dangerous people. If they suspect you're coming after them, then what? They'll threaten me?" Grady laughed, a sound without humor. "Agent Boyle, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not the victim here. Bradford is careful, calculated. He's not going to risk exposure by coming after me directly." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Predators who felt cornered were unpredictable, and he just helped corner an entire network. That night, sitting with Lessa in her kitchen, Grady explained what they'd found. She listened in growing horror. 30 people, she whispered. 30 men doing this to children, and no one knew. Some people knew. They just didn't act, like all those families who quietly switched tutors instead of reporting. "Like I almost did." Lessa's voice broke. "If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't pushed, I might have just moved on, found someone else, never knowing what he'd done, what he was part of. But you didn't. You saw the signs, you called the police, you protected your daughter." "We protected her," Lessa corrected. "Grady, I don't know what you're planning to do, but whatever it is, be careful. These people, if they're organized." A crash from upstairs interrupted her. They ran to Alexandria's room, found her standing by her window, which now sported a spiderweb crack in the glass. A rock lay on the floor, wrapped in paper. Grady grabbed it, unfolded the note. "Mind your business, or she's next." He was at the window in 2 strides, scanning the street. Empty. Whoever had thrown it was already gone. But they'd been here, at the house, targeting Alexandria specifically. "Call Detective Casey," Grady said, his voice eerily calm. "And pack bags for you and Alex. You're staying somewhere else tonight." "Grady." "Now, Lessa." While she made the calls and packed, Grady went to his apartment above the garage. From the locked cabinet he rarely opened, he retrieved his Glock 19, the one he'd carried in Afghanistan. He checked the magazine, chambered a round, and slipped it into the small of his back. He'd promised himself when he left the Marines that he was done with violence, done with the calculus of harm. But some promises couldn't be kept when children were in danger. Bradford and his network had just made a catastrophic mistake. They'd threatened Alexandria directly, shown their hand out of fear. Fear made people sloppy. Grady intended to exploit that sloppiness until their entire rotten structure collapsed. Detective Casey arrived with a patrol unit, collected the rock and note as evidence, took statements. "We'll increase patrols in the neighborhood," he said. "And I'll coordinate with the FBI. This could be witness intimidation, which is federal." "How long until they move on Bradford?" Grady asked. "They're working on warrants now. Should execute them within 48 hours. That's too long." "Mr. Howell, I understand you're upset, but you need to let us do your job." "Yeah, I've heard it." Grady's tone was flat. "What happens when they execute the warrants and Bradford runs? Men like him always have exit strategies." Casey hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Between us? You're probably right, but my hands are tied. We have to follow procedure." After the police left, Grady drove Lessa and Alexandria to a hotel near the airport, paid cash for a week's stay under his name. "Don't tell anyone where you are," he instructed. "Not friends, not family. Just me, Casey, and the FBI agents." "What are you going to do?" Lessa asked. "Make sure they can't threaten you again." Back at the house, Grady sat in darkness, thinking. The rock through the window was meant to silence them, to make them back down, but it had provided something valuable. Confirmation that Bradford was scared, that the network knew they'd been exposed. Scared prey ran, and running prey left trails. At 2 a.m., Grady's phone buzzed with a text from Cesar. Bradford just left his house. Driving east on I-90. Want me to follow? Yes. Stay back. Don't engage. For the next 3 hours, Grady tracked Cesar's updates as Bradford drove toward Pennsylvania, then turned north toward Erie. Finally, the PI sent a location pin, a truck stop outside Connaught. Meeting someone. White van. No plates visible. 2 men. Taking photos. Grady was already moving, grabbing his keys. Connaught was 90 minutes away. By the time he arrived, dawn was breaking over Lake Erie, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. Cesar sat in his car at the edge of the truck stop parking lot, camera with a telephoto lens resting on the dashboard. There in the diner, he said when Grady slipped into the passenger seat. Been in there for 30 minutes. Bradford looks agitated. Through the camera's viewfinder, Grady could see Bradford in a corner booth with 2 other men. One was heavyset, 50s, wearing a suit that looked expensive. The other was younger, nervous, constantly checking his phone. The older guy, Cesar said. I recognize him. Local attorney, Wallace Willis. Defends white-collar criminals mostly, but he's connected. The younger one, no idea. As they watched, the conversation in the diner grew heated. Bradford's gestures became more emphatic. Willis leaned back with the body language of someone refusing demands. The younger man looked ready to bolt. Willis is telling him no, Grady murmured. Bradford wants help, probably wants to run, and Willis is cutting him loose. Smart lawyer. Case is too hot now. The meeting broke up. Willis left first, driving away in a black Mercedes. The younger man hurried to the white van, practically running. Bradford sat alone for another 10 minutes, then paid and walked to his Honda. Follow the van, Grady told Cesar. I'll track Bradford. For the next 4 hours, Grady tailed Bradford through northeastern Ohio. The man drove aimlessly, clearly trying to decide his next move. He stopped at a bank in Ashtabula, emerged 20 minutes later with a stuffed envelope. Stopped at a convenience store, made a long phone call from a payphone. Running money, burning bridges. The behavior of someone preparing to disappear. At a gas station in Madison, Grady's phone rang. Agent Boyle. Mr. Howell, where are you? Out. We executed warrants on Bradford's home and vehicles this morning. He's not there. Any idea where he might be? Grady made a split-second decision. I-90, heading east. Last I saw, he was near Madison. A pause. How do you know that? Because I've been following him since 3 a.m. Jesus Christ. Mr. Howell, you need to stop. If he spots you, he won't. I'm good at this. This isn't Afghanistan. You can't just... Agent Boyle, with respect, you have warrants to execute. I'm just a concerned citizen who happens to know where your suspect is. What you do with that information is up to you. He hung up, continued following. Bradford stopped at a motel outside Geneva. Paid cash for a room. Grady parked 3 blocks away, sent the location to both Boyle and Casey, then settled in to wait. 2 hours later, unmarked FBI vehicles converged on the motel. Grady watched through binoculars as agents knocked on Bradford's door, identified themselves, executed their warrant. Bradford emerged in handcuffs, looking small and defeated in the morning light. It wasn't enough. Arrest wasn't justice, wasn't protection. The legal system would grind through its processes, and maybe Bradford would serve time, and maybe he wouldn't. Maybe the network would be exposed, and maybe it would just scatter and regroup. But Grady wasn't done. Not yet. The federal case against Gonzalo Bradford and his network moved with surprising speed once the warrants were executed. Agents found encrypted hard drives in his motel room. Desperate evidence of a man who'd planned to run but hadn't moved fast enough. The server in Akron yielded names, locations, methods. Within a week, coordinated raids across 6 states netted 17 arrests. Agent Boyle called Grady with updates, her tone warmer than their initial interactions. Your girlfriend's daughter isn't the only victim. We've identified at least 20 girls who were groomed by members of this network. Some of the content we found." She trailed off, and Grady could hear the strain in her voice. "It's going to be a long prosecution, but we're building solid cases." "What about Bradford specifically?" "He's cooperating, trying to reduce his sentence. Gave up names, passwords, everything. Still looking at 20 to 30 years minimum." It should have felt like victory. But when Grady hung up, all he felt was empty. Justice was being served. The legal system was functioning as intended. Alexandria was safe. The network was dismantled. Bradford would die in prison. And yet, he drove to the hotel where Lessa and Alexandria were staying. They'd been there 9 days now, living out of suitcases, waiting for the all-clear. When Lessa opened the door, he could see the toll it had taken, the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. "It's over," he said. "FBI made arrests across the network. Bradford's cooperating. You can come home." Lessa sagged against the door frame. "Thank God." "Alex, honey, did you hear? We can go home." But Alexandria, sitting on the bed behind her mother, didn't look relieved. She looked hollow, like someone who'd learned too young that monsters were real and proximity didn't make them less dangerous. "Can I talk to her?" Grady asked. Lessa glanced back at her daughter, who nodded slightly. "I'll go get us coffee from the lobby." After she left, Grady sat in the chair across from Alexandria. They'd had limited interaction since this started. He'd deliberately kept his distance, not wanting to crowd her, not sure how to navigate being a supportive figure without overstepping. "I'm sorry," Alexandria said quietly. "For what?" "For all this. For not telling sooner. For causing so much trouble." "Alex, look at me." He waited until she met his eyes. "You didn't cause any of this. Bradford did. His network did. What happened to you was a crime, and the blame sits entirely with the criminals. But if I just... There's no if I just. You were 12 years old. He was an adult who spent 15 years perfecting predatory techniques. The power imbalance was absolute. Nothing you could have done differently would have changed what he chose to do." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I feel so stupid." "You're not stupid. You're a kid who trusted an adult because we teach kids to trust adults, especially teachers and tutors. He exploited that trust. That makes him a predator, not you a fool. Will it get better? The feeling like I'm dirty or broken?" Grady's throat tightened. "I think so. Les is setting up counseling for you. You'll talk to people who specialize in this kind of trauma. And you have people who love you, who'll support you. That matters. Do you love me?" The question was small, vulnerable. "Yeah, kid, I do." It was the first time he'd said it aloud. This truth that had been building since he'd first watched her explain her science fair project about renewable energy, since he'd helped her fix her bike, since all the small moments that had added up to family. Alexandria nodded, wiping her eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When you were following him, when you found him at that motel, did you want to kill him?" Grady considered lying, softening the truth. But she deserved honesty. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because killing him would have made me a murderer, which would have hurt your mother and you. And because letting the system work, letting him be exposed and prosecuted and imprisoned, that's a longer, harder punishment than a quick death." "But what if the system hadn't worked? What if they hadn't found enough evidence? Then I would have found another way to stop him, legal or otherwise." Alexandria studied his face for a long moment. "Thank you for protecting me. Always, Alex. Always." When Lessa returned with coffee, the conversation shifted to practical matters, moving back home, resuming school, establishing new routines. But Grady could see the change in Alexandria, a small lightening of the weight she'd been carrying. Not healed, not yet, but maybe beginning to believe healing was possible. 6 weeks after Bradford's arrest, Grady stood in his office at the Lakewood construction site, reviewing blueprints for the project's final phase. His phone rang. "Detective Casey." "Thought you'd want to know," Casey said. 2 more members of Bradford's network just took plea deals. One of them gave up information about another network operating out of Columbus. "This thing keeps expanding." "Good. More predators off the streets." "Also wanted to tell you Bradford's attorney tried to get the evidence from Gallagher's investigation thrown out, claimed it was obtained illegally. Judge ruled against them. Everything's admissible." Grady allowed himself a small smile. "When's trial?" Not until next spring, probably. But with his cooperation, might not even go to trial. DA's offering 25 years, if he pleads to all counts. After the call, Grady walked the construction site, checking progress. The foundation was solid, the framing square, the work precise. Building something sturdy required attention to detail, understanding how pieces fit together, knowing which elements bore weight and which were merely decorative. He'd built a case against Bradford the same way, piece by piece, detail by detail, using the structure of investigation and law enforcement to create something sturdy enough to withstand legal challenges. His phone buzzed again. "Lessa, can you come over for dinner? Alex wants to show you something." At the house, Alexandria met him at the door with barely contained excitement. "I got my report card. Mr. Casey, you have to see." She thrust the paper at him. Straight A's across the board. "New tutors working out?" Grady asked, grinning. "She's really good. And Mom's been helping more too. But look at the teacher comments." He scanned the notes. Alexandria has shown remarkable resilience and growth this semester. Her participation in class discussions demonstrates both intellectual curiosity and emotional maturity beyond her years. "I'm proud of you," Grady said simply. Over dinner lasagna that Lessa had spent all afternoon preparing, they talked about ordinary things. School projects, construction deadlines, holiday plans. The kind of mundane conversation that represented healing, normalcy reclaimed from trauma. After Alexandria went upstairs to do homework, Lessa poured wine for herself and Grady, and they sat on the back porch in the cooling October evening. "I've been thinking," Lessa said, "about what you did. Following Bradford, coordinating with Cesar, pushing the investigation forward. Having regrets about dating a vigilante. You're not a vigilante. You're a man who saw a child in danger and did everything in his power to protect her while working within the system. That's different. I would have gone outside the system if necessary. I know, and I've realized I'm okay with that. Not happy about it, but okay. Because the alternative was letting him continue hurting children." Grady sipped his wine, watching the last light fade from the sky. "I keep thinking about all the families who switched tutors quietly. How many kids could have been protected if just one of them had made a formal complaint? You can't blame them for making the easy choice. Can I? Their easy choice meant more victims. Their silence enabled predators. And what would you have done differently if you didn't have the resources to hire a PI? If you couldn't track him yourself? If you were a single parent working 2 jobs just to stay afloat?" It was a fair point, one that complicated his anger. The system's failure wasn't just about individual choices, but structural inequities that made justice more accessible to some than others. "The FBI agent, Boyle, she told me they're using this case as a template," Lessa continued. "Training other agents on how to investigate these networks, how to build cases. Something good might come from this beyond just Bradford's arrest." "Does Alexandria know about the scope of it? The network? The other victims?" "Some. I've tried to give her age-appropriate information. She knows she wasn't alone, which seems to help somehow. Less isolating. She's a strong kid. She takes after her mother," Lessa said with a slight smile. Then, more seriously, "Grady, I need to know something. If this hadn't ended with arrests, if the law hadn't worked, what exactly were you planning?" He'd known this question would come eventually. Exposure. If the legal system couldn't touch him, I was going to destroy his reputation so thoroughly that no parent would ever hire him again. Leak the evidence to media, to parent networks, to schools. Make sure everyone knew exactly what he was. That's it? Just professional ruin? Grady met her eyes. "What else did you think I was planning?" "I don't know. You had that look, that intensity, like you were capable of anything." "I am capable of anything. But I'm also capable of choosing restraint, of calibrating my response to the situation. Bradford deserved to suffer, but not at the cost of my freedom or your family's safety." Lessa set down her wine glass, moved to sit beside him on the porch steps. "When this started, when we found those notes, I was terrified, not just of what had happened to Alex, but of what it might do to us. To you and me. And now I think we're stronger. You proved you'd protect my daughter like she was your own. That means everything." Grady pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. "She is my own, Lessa. Maybe not biologically, but in every way that matters. They sat in comfortable silence as full darkness settled over the neighborhood. Inside, they could hear Alexandria's music drifting from her room. Some pop song about resilience, about surviving storms. It seemed appropriate. For months later, Grady stood before a judge in a Cleveland courtroom, Lessa beside him. Alexandria sat in the gallery with her grandmother, watching with wide eyes as Grady raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. The prosecution had called him to testify about discovering the grooming notes, about hiring Cesar Gallagher, about the night Bradford fled toward Pennsylvania. Defense attorneys tried to paint him as a vengeful boyfriend who'd orchestrated a witch hunt, but their questions couldn't shake his calm, factual recounting of events. "Mr. Howell," the defense attorney asked, "isn't it true you followed my client with the intent to harm him?" "No. I followed him with the intent to ensure he didn't flee before law enforcement could apprehend him. You armed yourself with a handgun during this pursuit. I possess a legal concealed carry permit and was armed for personal protection, as I often am when traveling. But you intended to confront Mr. Bradford. I intended to monitor his location and report it to authorities, which is exactly what I did." The attorney tried several more approaches, but Grady's story remained consistent because it was true. He'd operated within legal boundaries, had worked with rather than against law enforcement, had protected his family while building a case for prosecution. When he stepped down from the witness stand, he caught Alexandria's eye. She gave him a small thumbs up, and he smiled. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: the encrypted hard drives, chat logs, testimony from multiple victims, forensic analysis of Bradford's devices. The defense's strategy of attacking the investigation's methods crumbled against the weight of corroborating evidence. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing 2 months later, Judge Ethel Zavala looked down at Gonzalo Bradford with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Bradford, you systematically exploited the trust placed in you by families who sought help for their children. You weaponized education, turning what should have been a safe learning environment into a hunting ground. The victim impact statements I've reviewed paint a picture of profound harm to children's sense of safety, to their academic confidence, to their ability to trust adults." She sentenced him to 45 years in federal prison. With no possibility of parole for 30 years, Bradford would be 90 before he breathed free air again. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the prosecution team. Agent Boyle gave a statement about the ongoing investigation into the broader network, about additional arrests expected in coming months. Grady and Lessa declined to comment, simply held hands and walked to their car. "Is it really over?" Lessa asked as they drove home. "The legal part is. The healing part will take longer. She's doing well, though. The therapist says she's processing everything in healthy ways." Grady nodded. Alexandria had thrown herself into school with renewed intensity, joined the debate team, made new friends. She still had nightmares sometimes, still struggled with trust. But she was fighting, growing, refusing to let Bradford's crimes define her. That evening, the three of them had dinner at a restaurant of Alexandria's, choosing a Thai place she discovered with her debate team. She chattered about an upcoming tournament, about her science teacher's crazy experiments, about ordinary teenage concerns. Watching her, Grady felt something settle in his chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but a sense of equilibrium restored. Justice had been served. The predator caged, the network dismantled. The system had worked, with help, with pushing, but it had worked. "What are you thinking about?" Lessa asked quietly. "How lucky I am," Grady replied. "To be here, with you too, to be part of this." Alexandria looked up from her pad thai. "Grady, I've been meaning to ask you something." "Shoot. Would you be okay if I called you Dad? I mean, you're with Mom, and you do all the dad stuff, and it feels weird calling you by your first name when you're basically—" She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Grady's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, cleared his throat. "Yeah, Alex. I'd be more than okay with that." "Cool." She returned to her noodles, as if she hadn't just fundamentally reordered his world. Lessa reached under the table, squeezed his hand. In her eyes, he saw love and pride and the shared knowledge of how close they'd come to losing this, how hard they'd fought to protect it. Later that night, after Alexandria was asleep and Lessa had gone to bed, Grady stood in the garage apartment that he rarely used anymore. looking at the wall where he'd assembled his investigation of Bradford. He'd taken most of it down after the trial, but a few pieces remained: photos of the courthouse, news clippings about the sentencing, a letter from one of the other victims' parents thanking him for pushing the investigation forward. He thought about the man he'd been before this started content with his work, falling in love with Lessa, building a quiet life. And the man he'd become during those frantic weeks, calculating, relentless, willing to go to dark places if necessary to protect the innocent. Both versions were true. Both versions were him. He gathered the remaining papers, placed them in a folder, filed it away in the cabinet with his service medals and deployment photos. Artifacts of who he'd been, who he could become when circumstances demanded. Then he locked the cabinet, turned off the lights, and walked across the yard to the house where his family slept. Tomorrow, he'd return to blueprints and construction schedules, to the satisfying work of building something solid and lasting. But tonight, he simply climbed the stairs to Lessa's room, slipped into bed beside her, and let the weight of the past months finally lift. Justice served, family protected, future secured. In the dark, Lessa murmured, love you too," Grady whispered back. And for the first time in months, he slept without nightmares, without the weight of unfinished business, without the constant calculation of what came next. The work was done. The family was safe. The monsters were caged. Finally, he could rest.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.